You know, when you joined Whitesnake, how did you learn all those songs? I mean, I'm guessing you knew some of them, like probably Still of the Night and stuff like that, but that must have been a lot of hours of learning how to play those songs inside out. Or are you or can you deviate a little bit from the original?
Well, the best thing to do when you join a band that's been working for a while like that is you have to realize that the original recording happened many, 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 many years ago. And while they've been playing the songs on the road, they've evolved and changed a little. They're played at different tempos. There's maybe certain things inserted. So the smartest thing you can do is get a board tape. And you ask for, like, is there any way to give me a current recording of the way things sound these days? Because what can happen is you join a band and you go back and you learn the original stuff off the album. And then you go into the first rehearsal and they haven't heard it played like that in 30 years. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this new guy's showing up and playing all this weird stuff, right? So you want to fit as closely into what everybody's been used to hearing in the most recent history as possible. And that's how, like when I filled in for Mick Jones and Foreigner, I had very little notice. I had like a day's notice to get their set together because we were out together, Night Ranger at the time, who I was with, Foreigner, and Journey. So I was like, get me a board tape. It wasn't like, let me go back to the original versions. And I didn't have time for that. I mean, I was like, I've got a day. Like, what do? Well, you learn what Mick's been playing like yesterday on that concert and play that. Right, so that's really the way to do it, and there's been times I can cite for you, like Twisted Sister live has played the harmony solo for We're Not Gonna Take It differently than it actually is on the recording. When you go back and you listen, it's kind of a strange harmony when you go back to the actually original version and you learn it. And I remember showing up at the rehearsal when I did some gigs with Dee for his solo thing and knowing the original version, and that was totally like him going, dude, what are you doing there? And I was like, well, I'm playing the original version. And he was like, oh, yeah. So that's a perfect example of something that like throws a gear, a wrench into the gears and screws everything up. So you're better off to always go like, do you have anything really current that I can learn off of? And that's the best way to operate. And you will find that definitely tempos change. Bands like to play songs faster live or slower live, and if you've trained yourself to the original versions, that can actually kind of mess you up a little bit because you're going to always feel like playing slightly faster than the band or slightly slower. So real important to get your hand on those board tapes.
Oh God, I can imagine. Yeah, because it's just so much to go through. And like you say, especially if you've got a back catalogue like, Whitesnake has, and then they're playing it differently now as well. I mean, that's nuts. Have you got, again, you might not be able to answer this because I think you were saying it with the songs and stuff, but when you think about all the incredible guitarists that have been in Whitesnake, is there one that is your particular favourite that you like their style?
No way, I can't do that. Are you kidding me? So, no, there's every guitarist that's been in Whitesnake is a great player. So, I think at a point, it's just apples and oranges. I have respect for every single one of them.
They've all brought their own thing, haven't they, to the table kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's David's attitude when he hires players, is to let you be yourself in there, and he doesn't stress necessarily emulating any of the past players. He hires you for you, and you just do your best. But certainly like solos that people are used to hearing off of the bigger songs, you do your best to try and recreate those note for note. I mean, I remember being younger and being the fan in the audience and hating when the guitar player would change the solo that you're used to hearing on the cassette or whatever. So I definitely try and stay true to things like that I know fans just want to hear the song, and it's not about me putting my own stamp on it or anything. I think that stuff, the longer you play gigs, that stuff kind of happens naturally. You end up changing little things. You go, maybe I'll change that one little thing I do with that, and then all of a sudden, those kind of accumulate, and you find yourself playing your own versions of it. But in general, my mindset is to make sure that everybody else feels comfortable when you join a band. You don't want to come in and sound completely different. It's very distracting to people. You know, you want it to sound as similar as possible so they go, gosh, this guy fits right in. It feels like just like it did at the end of the last run or whatever. So you do your very best to just try and keep other people comfortable.
Yeah, until you've got your feet fully under the table, and then you're like, right, let's mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I think as time goes by, then you do start to do some. But in general, I mean, that's, I would say, like, my mindset, if I were to be like, what am I, when I'm playing a solo for a Whitesnake song, I would definitely put the fans before me. What I would want to play, I would put David before me for sure. You know, that's like, what do they want? What's going to make them happy? You know, not necessarily like, hey, check out what I can do with this solo, you know. So it's more, I think it's, especially with songs that people have been listening to for 35, 40 years. I mean, it's just ridiculous to go in and try and reinvent something that people hold so dear to their hearts. So I do my best to stay faithful to that stuff, and that's just more of my mindset. I mean, there's opportunities abounding in music to do your own thing, so to speak. You know, you just kind of figure out where those moments are. There's nothing stopping me from later today writing a brand new song that's mine and creating my own music. Now, I might not go play it for 10,000 people, but that doesn't mean I can't do my own thing with music and still be an artist.
Well, you do that anyway, because you've got Whitesnake have put new albums out. Like, you've got Flesh and Blood, and then there's a new one coming out as well, isn't there? When's the new one out? Isn't that out this year?
No, I think we're just looking at the farewell tour pretty much right now. That's being lined up for 2022 at the moment. The only dates that have been released are starting in the UK with Foreigner and Europe, and then going to Europe with Europe. So very confusing to promote a tour in Europe with that band playing.
Is it actually going to be a farewell tour then? Is this really it?
Yeah. I think David's going to stay active, from what I understand and from what I've read in interviews. I mean, our interactions are always lighthearted. It's always joking and stuff like that. But things I've heard him say recently are that, I mean, I think he'd like to obviously stay active in terms of the Whitesnake banner and do things and release some things. I'm sure it's not like this is the last time you're ever going to see him, but I think in terms of the big touring, he's looking to make this his farewell tour, which is, I mean, you know, that's I think that's, for me, it's beautiful. I mean, I get to be a part of a send-off for somebody who's had a pretty amazing career, man. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who's done better than David, you know, with his time in Deep Purple and obviously working with Jimmy Page, with Coverdale Page, and obviously all the immense success he's had with Whitesnake. And so that, for me, is cool. I'm good with that, man. Just being like, hey, I get to be part of, like, the band that, you know, gives him a proper send-off. And I hope, hopefully it'll turn into a situation where we get some people come visit and some people that have been a part of the history. I think it has an opportunity to be very special in that regard. David's, you know, obviously had so many talented musicians in the band over the years, and it would just be wonderful to see him have an opportunity to connect with some of them and share a special moment. Yeah. So I'm hoping that we get some moments like that along the way too. Honestly, my mindset's there too, is like, hey, I'm lucky to just be in the band and to have the opportunity to get to do what I do. So I'm just gonna wrap my head around what can I do to make David's send off from touring like as good as it can possibly be.
What will you do after that? What will be next for you?
Well, I mean, the guitar thing just never stops with me. So, I mean, I still have Trans-Siberian Orchestra that I tour with regularly. And I just finished up the guitars for a project that's coming out with Michael Sweet and Nathan James and Marco Mendoza and my Whitesnake bandmate Tommy Aldridge. So we'll see what happens with that. But my main thing is like, and it comes down to that daily thing, that consistency thing we spoke about earlier, where I just try and make sure every day I'm doing something to move forward, and life just kind of tends to present opportunities that you'd go like, huh? Like, okay, cool. Like Cher was definitely one of those. I mean, there was no way when I was 11, I was like, someday I'm going to play with Cher, but like that came along just by staying open-minded and working hard, doing your best at every turn. So I hope to just kind of keep doing that and see where life takes me, more than try and have some kind of grand scheme or some business plan or anything like that. It's more about just put in the work, put in the time, and let life kind of take me where I'm meant to be.
What was Cher like to work with then?
Oh, I mean, great. Iconic, total pro, very soft-spoken, like off stage, you know, and but really, really great to me. So, you know, very, very nice to me, and it's on something like that where there's so many people involved, the dancers, the crew. Cher is Cher, you know. I think the main thing to remember is like, maybe I'm best to just do my job here, and when she comes up and wants to have an interaction, cool. But that thankfully was part of the show. I mean, I got to step out there a few times with her during the show, and it was really just her and I downstage, and that was amazing. I mean, super fun, and you just try and be very careful and not become known as the guy who knocked over Cher on stage accidentally on TMZ or something like that, right? Which was more difficult than it sounds, because she never did the same thing twice. She would move to different spots when I would step out there, and sometimes we would interact, and sometimes I would just try and create, I guess, symmetry on the stage. So if Cher was going stage left, I would say, it's my job to go stage right so the people aren't bored over there. And as we would cross, there were times where maybe she'd want to interact. And so while I'm playing, and also probably fairly scared to death, you know, because you're playing on those tours, those shows were 20,000 people a night. And, you know, so just like I said, try to become not become the guy who knocked over, bumped into Cher on stage or something, and you know. So.
Do you think the stuff that you did on Broadway, do you think that helped with you thinking about like the choreography on stage and the symmetry and all of that, like where you're meant to be? That must have helped.
That's definitely a TSO thing more than anything. The Trans-Siberian Orchestra, those that haven't seen that show, the stage is enormous. I mean, it's the width of the arena. Right. So during that, we definitely have a discussion about, you know, not having a dead spot in the stage, because you don't want people who paid for their tickets over there to be like, hello, there's no one over by us right now at all. So there's usually a lot of talk about, you're going to be here during this section, and people think that we choreograph it to the point where even your behavior in those spots is done, but that's not true. You basically go to a spot, and it's your job to entertain that certain section of people that can see you well during that time.
Okay, cool. Fun. So I have to ask you quickly before I let you go about your weapon of choice. So, is it the Les Paul?
Yeah, I'm definitely a Les Paul guy. So there's one where you could ask me my favorite, and I would give you a straight answer. It took me a long time, oddly enough. You know, I grew up in the 80s, and everybody had the Floyd Rose guitars, the whammy, I don't know if you know the Floyd Rose system, but I grew up mainly playing like a Kramer Beretta and a modified Phil Collins model Jackson at the time that I had gotten from my friend Brett Garcid. And then I became a Telly was my main guitar for a while, a Strat was my main guitar, and then suddenly I got this guitar here, and I went, like, what took me so long? This just is the best. Les Pauls for me are just like the best sounding guitar.
I think you have to work a little bit harder with a Les Paul, though.
You have to work a little bit harder. You definitely compromise a little bit of your technique, but the difference is that you can play one note, and that one note sounds 10 times better than the one note on a bad guitar. So, yeah, I definitely have turned into a Les Paul guy. I love them, and they're my favorite. And even all the other Gibsons that I go to play, I do have an SG, and I've got a Firebird, I've got an Explorer, and, you know, V's. And I always tend to think when I'm recording, I'm like, yeah, but the Les Paul is like, you know, that much better than all of them. And so,
surely the SG must have been your first guitar that you wanted because of Angus.
yeah, so what happened there is I was way too young to be like, oh, well, I see, that's a Gibson SG. I saw this red guitar or maroon guitar with the curves up top, the horns. And so I ended up getting a guitar at the local mall that was like, it was an Electra Weststone, which was an inexpensive guitar, but it kind of had the curves. And so it was like some, I think in my mind, like that's the Angus guitar, but I was too young. I mean, I was 11. I wasn't thinking it through like, yep, this is the actual. Plus, I don't know if my parents would have dropped like the money on a SG when you're just beginning. It's like, let's get the kid something that's $150 and see how he does. And
so what was the first guitar that was like the guitar, like I guess the big spend?
Yeah, baby steps again with that. I mean, I guess the time the Kramer Beretta, I think $500, which when you're 14 or something, that feels like, ooh, that's a lot of money, and I forget what I paid Brett for that Jackson, but hard for me to remember. I remember buying a Brian Moore guitar that was kind of my main guitar for like a minute, but never really became it. And that was an expensive guitar. How
many do you own now? How many guitars you got?
It's in the low 40s, I believe. It sounds like a lot, but when you consider the fact that you need all these specialty items, like a 12-string acoustic and a 12-string electric and a sitar-style electric guitar and a lap steel, and so you get all these guitars that are kind of meant for certain things. Definitely a steel string acoustic, a nylon string acoustic. By the time you're done doing stuff like that, I mean, I definitely have more than I need, but it's also just fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have been at it my whole life, and it's how I make my living. So I always feel like pretty good about owning that many. I think it gets insane when you're like, I own 225 guitars and things like that, right? It's like, well, how could you possibly play them? Mine are all fairly beat up. Like, they all see a pretty good amount of action. I've tried to mix it up during teaching, where I'll spend the week teaching on a different guitar every week during COVID, so they all got some action. And the TSO tour I take the most out, because if you haven't seen that, it's a gigantic production. Like, the lights and pyro and fog it's over the top. Everything is like this visual spectacle. So I started to kind of join in on the party by going, well, I guess this is a time to bring all the really cool looking guitars. And
yeah, go and have some fun.
Even though I could probably play like these 8 songs on one guitar, let's break that up into 5 or 6 guitars, because it's more fun to look at. And that's all I consider to be good, clean fun.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a good habit to have. It's not, it's all clean, like you say.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for coming on the show. Some really interesting stuff there. And like you say, I just need to get my 5 minutes in every day to get my mojo back.
Absolutely. So I got to either play to wrap it up, or